Well, it's definitely been a long time coming, and it's finally here. So, today, guys, I'm bringing you a review for a game that I think a fair amount of people have been waiting for, officially. And that is for Trails into Reverie. I've got a fair amount to talk about with this, so without any further delay, let's jump right into it. The story of Trails into Reverie is slightly different to what we've gotten before. This is more a combination of Crossbell and Erebonia arcs ending, and what we can expect from the Carver arc that would be coming too. You essentially play as 3 different routes in the game, which are Lloyd's route, Reen's route, and C's route. I won't be revealing who C is, but I'm sure most people can kind of guess who it is. But for the sake of this video, I'll just say C. Each route consists of 4 chapters, with a final chapter where everyone comes together, like a typical RPG pretty much. And as you can guess, Lloyd's route will mainly focus on Crossbell's issues. Again, for whatever reason, Crossbell's always get into trouble, while Reen and C's route will focus on Erebonia as a whole. As you would expect, most of these teams will consist of the usual people that are in this type of area. So with Lloyd's route, you'll have mainly the SSS, where there's a few exceptions where a few of the Cold Steel characters will be there as well, mainly because you'll notice what will be happening during the ceremony that's taking place within the first chapter of Lloyd's route. Reen's side will consist of the usual cast from Cold Steel, while albeit most of them don't really turn up to like later on in the game, so you're kind of stuck with a few of them throughout most of the game, mainly the people from his class, with a few exceptions of course here and there. And C's route is where you'll meet the new cast that has been added into the game, which are Swin, Nadia and Lapis. There are also a few guest characters as well that join them during the story as well, which makes for honestly probably like a unique team compared to the other 2 protagonists. And I honestly think a lot of people probably enjoy their part of the story a lot more. The story itself, I won't do a deep dive into it, but basically the start of the game takes place not long after the Great Twilight from Cold Steel 4. However, there's trouble arises again when Crossbell is under threat again. This time is done by a few war remnant people who are basically saying they do not want the war to end, they want it to continue going, because mainly they just got nothing else to lose at this point pretty much. And that they want to fulfill the late Chancellor's wish, which obviously not really true in this case. Of course, this is stopped by the SSS, but this is a taste of what's to come in the future of the game. Now, as for pacing for the game, I would probably say it's one of the best in the series so far to date. The flow of the story is very good, and it kept me quite engaged as something new was always happening compared to Cold Steel 3 and 4, where there's quite a bit of repetitiveness to it, to the point where sometimes I'm just autopiloting through it until like something major happens pretty much. It also probably helps that the story is shorter compared to the previous 2 Trails games, and that there are no side quests in this game as well, which is a first for like god knows how long. That's not to say that side quests are bad, it's just that I felt some of them in some of the games just felt not out of place. It just was not needed at that moment, and sometimes it just overbloats the game. One new feature has been added into the game, which is somewhat ties into the story, is the True Reverie corridor. So hearing that name, you might remember it from Cold Steel 2, where you had something similar like near to the end of the game. It's similar to that, but it's a bit more refined now. When you reach a certain point of the main story, you are basically thrusted into this new world. At first, it'll just be Lloyd and Reen's team. Essentially, the way this place works is that once you reach inside, you cannot remember, or they cannot remember what they're doing on the outside world. And when they leave the area, they cannot remember what they was doing inside that world, mainly because of what's happening in the outside world in the game. The AI system, the AI system basically doesn't want the influence of what's happening in the outside world to have an effect what's happening there, mainly just to give the team a chance to actually see this through without any trouble pretty much. You'll see it in the story, I'm not going to go too deep into this one. But think of this place as where you can pretty much farm, train your characters, gain some levels, gain some sepith, mainly just to like deck your characters out, mainly for like the fights that are there to come in the future of the story as well. So if you're playing like on Nightmare or something, this is honestly probably your best way to actually get the quartz that you need, or the equipment that you need for later fights, because there are some fights that are a bit troublesome later on, but I'll get into that later on. Now, how the corridor itself works is again similar to Cold Steel 2 a bit. However, there are 4 floors initially in the game, but later floors will obviously unlock when you progress through the story. So when you start out, you essentially just have the first floor, and then later on you unlock the second, and then the third, and then the fourth. Now the first two floors are actually part of the story, so when you get to certain points of the story you're actually forced to do it. However, the third and the fourth floor are, I wouldn't say optional, but you do not have to do them straight away. Now when you go into these floors, you would have treasure chests that will like house different types of equipment or books or something, and basically a lot of variety in these treasure chests. You also have strong enemies, formidable foes, and then you've got the bosses itself. Like you got one that's mainly like a mid-floor boss, and then you got a main boss. Defeating these types of enemies will reward you with these ceiling stones. So essentially there is like a type of gacha system in the game, which I know when people hear the word gacha they're like, oh no, here we go again. But to be fair, in this game they've done it right. So all the like previous costumes and stuff from that previous games you can get from this system. Obviously you're just going to have to farm quite a bit. Essentially you have the gold ceiling stones, the blue ones, the red ones, and then the silver ones. So the silver ones being like the least, essentially will grab you from accessories to quartz to money in the game, literally anything in the game, even like costumes and stuff as well. The red ceiling stones will give you a new mini game to be played, so it can be either the pom-pom mini game or the beach mini game. Well, I didn't call it mini game, I call it like a side area pretty much, or the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire mini game as well. There's quite a few of them out there as well. The blue ones will give you a side story which are called daydreams in this game. So essentially these are like stories that have happened already, but they're not part of the main story in a sense. So basically it's like what has happened between the whole liberation of Crossbell and before the main, like the start of the game pretty much. And there is quite a few of them out there as well. So even when playing through the story, sometimes there might be referencing some stuff that's happened in these daydreams. So it's a good idea to actually go and play these and see what's been happening, and it'll give you like a better insight onto like what they've been doing just before the whole world pretty much comes down to shit pretty much. I know that's a bad word to really say, but yeah, honestly I would say do them. They actually give quite a good decent amount of stuff as well, and they're quite funny, some of them as well. Now the gold ceiling stones will give you guest characters. So there's a select pool of characters that are available in this corridor and only in this corridor. Each floor tends to have one, so you can easily get a character out of a select pool. I'll probably like link it down below and everything, but essentially if there's like a specific character you want, it's ideally that you'd want to save before going to the ceiling stone area and using it. So if you don't get the character you want, you can just reload and do it again. Eventually you're going to get all the characters regardless, so if you're not really too fussed on that part, then you know it is what it is. But if you're try harding or trying to do min-max and everything, then yeah, it's best to save before you actually use it. As for the additional 4 floors that are added into the game, this is post-game. So if you remember, the JP version actually got an update to this like I think a month or 2 after the game initially came out, where it adds more story to the corridor and more floors, and there's also another character as well that's available in the corridor. This time only one, and it was surprising who it was when I actually played it first time back then. But it's actually quite nice that we actually get the full package when it comes to the English version, so you're not basically waiting for like no update or anything. Literally everything that came as an update for the JP version is already here in the English version. One final note to add on the corridor is that once you've cleared a floor, if you want to basically respawn all the enemies, chests and everything in there, you'd have to talk to the globe in the middle of the I would say hub world of the corridor just to reset, and then you can go and explore that floor again with new items to obtain and more stuff to farm pretty much, as the enemies will always stay the same on that particular floor. So that also goes for the bosses as well for each floor, so you would always be facing the same bosses as well. We also have mini missions as well that's been added into the game along with main missions. So essentially what these do for you is that they give you like rewards and stuff for completing them. These are either phantasmal shards or master quartz or some super accessories or some super quartz as well. The main missions will never go away. Essentially, if you're trying to go for platinum, you need to do all of them, excluding like the ones that have been added through the DLC, which I guess now you wouldn't really be able to tell what is DLC or not. you might have to look up a guide, while the mini missions, that will always change. So for example, if you go and reset the whole floor again, the mini missions will change again as well. So honestly, you'll probably be spending a lot of time in the corridor than outside, in the outside world pretty much, especially if you, as I said, if you're like on the harder difficulties as well. But yeah, it's honestly a nice addition to the game, and I think it's definitely needed, because if it was just straight story, then the game would probably be like 30 hours or less pretty much. So it doesn't really bloat, it actually gives you something different to do, or something to like relax with when you're not trying to do story or something. Gameplay in Reverie is still the same system that we've known for quite some time now, and that is the system from Cold Steel 3 and 4. However, there have been a few additions to this system and a few tweaks to balancing as well. One of them is being the United Fronts ability. This feature essentially allows you to attack with all your characters in the party, your reserve party as well, and people that are in your extra slots as well for Brave Orders, which I'll talk about in a minute. So you have either heal, arts, and attack. Essentially, healing will heal you to an extent while giving you a defense up, while using arts will attack the enemy, dealing a certain amount of damage, while also give you an arts up as well for a certain amount of turns, while using attack will also attack the enemy but give you strength up for a certain amount of turns. So if you're trying to just clean up mobs quickly, this is probably the easiest way to do it. Of course, it does cost one assault gauge, but say for example, if you're in the corridor or something, you get the assault gauge back very quickly because there's a lot of items to be broken there. Kind of similar to the real world as well in the game, but not as frequent. Of course, this can also be buffed up as well in the game. So as I was talking about the True Reverie corridor earlier, when you complete missions or mini missions, you're given phantasmal shards, and you can use it to basically buff your damage that you do for your United Fronts or how much healing you gain from it. You can also gain an extra BP slot with the max being 8 instead of 5 now. You can also gain an extra, I think, 2 more assault gauges so that you would have 5 instead of 3 now. So essentially you can see that farming in the Reverie corridor can be quite beneficial. Now as for balance changes, there's not too many, so some of the master quartz have been nerfed a bit, and the use of Corona Burst, which is what everyone's favorite move is, especially if you're like higher difficulties, you can't abuse it as much now. You can use it once in your turn, but you cannot like continuously use it like previous games pretty much. But I mean, let's be honest, that move is still stupidly powerful to the point where it I can understand why they just even got rid of it in the future games pretty much. But that is a story for another time. Now, speaking of difficulties in Reverie, it introduces Abyss mode. So essentially, if you play the JP version of Reverie, Abyss was added in with the whole update shenanigans and stuff as well. But here in English, you can have it from the get-go pretty much. So if you played the earlier Legend of Hero games, you would understand that those nightmare modes were like the definition of nightmare. Of course, you can still break everything and all that stuff, but you know, that's where it actually gave you a real challenge. And that's not to say that later games don't really give you a challenge. Obviously, if you're a veteran like half the fan base is, then yeah, Nightmare's not really a challenge for you anymore these days. But for your average player, maybe, yeah, it could be a bit of a challenge. So I did dabble into Abyss a bit more this time compared to when I played it last time, and it's not too bad. It's just that you have to do quite a bit of prep work for some of the bosses, especially when you're at the start of the game, mainly because you don't have access to the Reverie corridor and you literally just gotta go with what you have pretty much. It's only when you reach like chapter 2, 3 of the game, then it starts to become a lot more manageable because you've got a lot more access to like different arts, different crafts, different Brave Orders to use, different Master Quartz you can use. So yeah, as usual, the start of the game will probably be like your worst enemy pretty much. But yeah, gameplay wise in general, not much has changed. So if you've played Cold Steel 3 and 4, literally it's just the same thing regardless. Just with like 1-2 features tweaked and added and all that stuff, as I said earlier. And this is probably where Falcom kind of saw that, you know, they actually had to say, we need to change the system because we've had it for so long and it's gotten quite stale. And that was my first initial response when I played the game back in JP, is that, yo, we need something different for like the next thing, because we cannot have this again, because essentially everyone knows the builds to be done. You can make Torval into like literally caster that will just obliterate everything with its speed. Feed the evasion tank, pair that up with like some master course. Like literally you just go through the same builds over and over again, and it gets stale to the point where it's just like I don't even want to do it anymore. I actually just want to go through the game with a bit of challenge, so I kind of limit myself onto it. Look at me rambling here. But yeah, gameplay wise it's still the same, so if you know all your builds from previous games and all that stuff, it's literally gonna work here as well. Now, while I've praised the game for the majority of this video, there were a few issues. I wouldn't say a few, mainly like one issue that I came across when playing the game again, and that is the size of the playable characters. Now, while I do appreciate having 50 plus playable characters in the game, it also felt a bit too much considering the fact that some of these characters not even get touched at all throughout the game. Obviously it just depends on your personal preference, but if you're trying to go for the absolute best of the best, then you know like half the cast is just not even worth building up at that point. And it doesn't help that a fight in the Reverie corridor, that was part of the JP DLC that's added into the game. Basically the last floor of the post-game Reverie, there's a boss where you essentially need 24 characters somewhat built. Obviously you can get away with 12 considering the split into 3 teams, but if one of your teams just gets nuked, which will happen quite a bit in that fight, so you best hope that your backup team in that particular team is actually built as well, else you're literally just going to go through super hell in that part. But yeah, you can see how it's like a double-edged sword pretty much. Great to have them, it's great to have the option, but when it comes to building and all that stuff, it's like you need to really see who's worth building with all the resources that you have. Of course, if you're just farming for a considerable amount of time, then you can probably eventually build everyone, but by that point it's just going to be like you're just doing it for funds pretty much. Now on that note, there are 2 issues that actually kind of run into the game itself, and that was quite interesting because I'd actually never run into these before when playing the JP version. So essentially there was a cutscene on Sea's Route, which was, I think it was, I believe, chapter 3 or chapter 2, one of the 2 anyway. You essentially enter Crossbell, and when going on the airspace pretty much, when you're landing down, you'll see like a few NPCs running towards the ship. There's a chance that some of the NPC could just they can just fall through the floor and essentially lock you into that cutscene where you just have to skip it, so you don't get to see like what happened. It happened to me like 4 times in a row before it worked, and I did notify them about it, and I do believe it is fixed now. I'll have to go and double check that again. Another issue was going for fish number 15 in the fish book. So essentially this is on Sea's Route again, where you're going to go like on a specific road before you reach a certain place. There's like a fish you can catch, and anytime I decided to try and catch it, the game will literally just crash on the PS5 like all the time. Obviously this did get patched eventually, like I think a few days after I reported it. But yeah, I kind of find it funny still that it made it into the game somehow, but that just goes to show that when you even do proper QA testing, there's always something that can always happen. Now, I do not know if it can happen on different consoles and stuff or PC version, but hopefully that's not the case. I do know that the PC version, apparently during the final fight, when you're trying to guard in a certain fight, the game will just crash from what I've been told, so hopefully that's fixed before it's released, else you're pretty much screwed, especially if you're playing on Nightmare or something. That is like a thing that you really need to do, but I won't get into that because that's kind of spoiler territory. Now, I'll give props to Nis America for this, mainly because they've been so fast to work on like these issues and stuff, because when it comes to these games, honestly, there always seems to be somewhat of an issue when it comes to Trails games when they're pulling it over somehow, but I do give them credit. They actually go and fix it properly and fast as well. Now, with all that said and done, we've come to the end of the video. So Trails into Reverie is a nice send-off to Crossbell and Erebonia arc, and it paves way for the Calvert arc and what to expect from it, as at the end of the game you kind of get a glimpse of how the engine or new engine that they'll be using going forward, along with some other cutscenes that you might see here and there as well if you're doing the true Reverie corridor that kind of pushes into the whole Calvert arc as well. Although gameplay wise the game doesn't really build upon the previous games and all that stuff. Story is where the main attraction is and what most people tend to play it for. And I honestly say it does a great job with the story and the way it presents itself with minimal pacing issues. So to any RPG fans out there who have not given this series a try, I'd honestly say give it a shot. You've got nothing to lose. I think you'd actually enjoy it for the most part. And for the Trails fans that are out there, well, we all know this is a no-brainer for you to get because you should honestly play this. I know some people might be tired of playing with Reverie and all that stuff, but look, it's the final time for now. Who knows, we might see him in the next arc at some point. Maybe. I wouldn't even be surprised because he seems to be like a fan favorite to some people anyway. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much in it. I don't believe I did, but well, that's people's opinions maybe here and there. If you like the review, leave a like, leave a comment. If you've got any questions about the game, you can also leave a comment as well, or hit me up on Twitter and all that stuff. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. So I'll see you guys later.